Hi, everybody. So we, in the previous lecture, were talking about ending up with China and Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism. And now we're going to go all the way into the Mediterranean world out in the west to Greece. There'll be a lot of questions on the exam about Greece for obvious reasons. Such a huge cultural source for the West, as you guys see there, right at the start of the chapter 4 notes. Greece has given profound influence on many aspects of life that you and I are familiar with. So, one of the first examples is Greek sculpture standards of beauty have defined beauty in the Western world for 7,000 years, and that continues to be so. This is Winged Victory Samothrace, better known to you guys as Nike, as in the Louvre. It's one of the great masterpieces of the Louvre there in Paris. There's some argument over scholars of what was the significance of this, but whatever it was, it probably was a victory celebration. She was standing on the bow of a warship, which you can kind of see there. Now, in case you're wondering, she did have arms and a head originally. They have found a hand of hers in the last century. Unfortunately, the head and the rest of the arms are gone, but even still, you get an idea of just the extraordinary capability, artistic genius of the Greek sculptor who carved her from marble. If you look closely, you can see, again, also you can see the wind pushing back on her uh, spray-soaked clothing. You can see the wind pushing it back on her body. You can see the wings being pushed back behind her. And to do that and to make it look like the fabric is wet, clinging to her skin as she's standing there in victory on the bow of this warship as it's cutting through the waves, and to do that in an argent like marble, but to make it appear soft and fluid and flowing, extraordinary. One of the reasons why Greek art has played such a huge role in the Western world, because there is nothing like this. Now, Egyptian art, Assyrian art, Babylonian art, Persian art, magnificent, powerful, impressive. But there's nothing as lifelike like this, even close to it, from those other ancient civilizations. I'm not saying the art was not beautiful. It was. It was magnificent, had a great gravitas or weight to it, spectacular. But it had a very static form to it. It was not dynamic like you see in the Winged Victory Samothrace or Nike standing there in the back of worship. See, one foot is behind the other as if she's striding forward, bracing herself into the wind. There's nothing like it. That's the Venus de Milo, also there in the Louvre. We'll see, come back to her a little bit. The Parthenon there in Athens, another one of the great buildings that has profoundly influenced architecture around the world, but particularly in the West. So we'll come back to all that. But first off, let's start off with geography of ancient Greece. And there we go. That's really the Greek homeland. That's not simply today what we know as Greece. It also includes the coast, just along the coast there, what today would be Turkey, as well as Crete. All that area really is the home of the Greek civilization. That gives you a good idea what Greece is like. Greece is not a very big place. It's quite mountainous. As you see, it's surrounded by the sea on three sides. There's many, many small islands there. So the sea has always played an integral part to life for the Greeks, for obvious reasons, for food, for trade, for protection, for expansion, for all those things. The sea has been incredibly important to the Greeks. Greece is mountainous. You can see from that geographic map there on the right, it is quite mountainous. So it has cut Greek up. So it's not, you don't have large plains in Greece. Again, being quite mountainous. So you have cities in the small plains between mountain ranges, but it is a very hilly terrain there. That's one reason why scholars argue perhaps Greece developed so independently, because there's not great plains. And they're easy to defend in a sense. And so Greek culture develops very independent-minded, as we'll see here shortly. For time, we're going to have to skip over kind of the dark ages of the Greeks, the Minoans and Mycenaeans. Not that they're not important, but there's so much to cover in Greece that we have to make choices. So, and that takes us to our beginning here. The first thing I want you guys to know, besides obviously the impact of geography and its role playing an individual aspect in shaping the Greek political identity, and that is with the great classic Greek literature, which is Homer's Iliad. I'm going to give you a little background in this piece. You guys are probably familiar with the basic outlines of this piece, but I want to give you guys just a little bit more background because it gives you a real good idea of what the Greeks valued, how they viewed the gods, and what they view as admirable, what they view as dastardly, and so forth. So the story famously starts off where some of the Greek goddesses, Aphrodite among them, but she's not the only one, that they decide it's Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, who you don't need to know those names, but three goddesses, for some reason, decide to have a beauty contest with each other. That's a bad idea, but they decide we're going to do that. And they go to Zeus and ask Zeus, we'd like you to judge this. He wisely decides, I'm not judging between these three goddesses. There's no way I win in this equation. If I pick one, the other two will be angry at me and feel I was unfair. There's no way I'm doing that. So Zeus tells him, I'll tell you what, I don't feel comfortable doing this, but there is a human on Earth that is incredibly objective. He'd be the perfect person for your little rival beauty contest. His name is Paris. Why don't you talk to him? The goddess, I think that's a good idea. They go down to Earth and talk to Paris and say, we'd like you to judge our little beauty pageant. He foolishly agrees to do that. Now, despite the fact all three of these are goddesses and all of these women are incredibly beautiful, they're goddesses after all also. But none of them feel completely confident they're going to win this thing. So all three of them want to have some kind of sweetener. And so all three of them, before the contest starts, they take Paris aside and said, look, you're going to pick me, right? And what do I need to do to make you pick me? So all three of them offer sweeteners. But the one who offers him the best deal is Aphrodite, even though perhaps she's not the most beautiful. But she goes to him and says, look, if you pick me, because I gotta best my sisters here. You got to pick me. And the way you do that is, and how I'll reward you is, I will guarantee if you pick me and I win, because if you pick me, I will win. I guarantee you the love of the most beautiful woman on earth, guaranteed. Paris likes the offer better than the other two offers given, so they have a little beauty pageant. I don't know what they did for the talent portion, whatever. At the end of it, Paris picks, surprise, Aphrodite. Now, she lords over the other two female goddesses, and true to her word, she gives Paris the love of the most beautiful woman on earth. But here's where the story takes a curve and gets set off a very sad chain of events leading to tragedy. Not surprisingly, and we talked about this already in class, when any of these ancient gods do a deal with human beings, you better always check the fine print. Because Aphrodite does not lie. She does give Paris the love of the most beautiful woman on earth, as she promised. Now, what she didn't say is the most beautiful woman on the earth is already married, and her husband is a Greek king. In fact, he's from Sparta. That's trouble. So Paris does. He, in a sense, elope's the wrong word, because she's already married, but he sneaks off with Helen. Her name is Helen of Troy. And he sneaks off with her. Well, she becomes Helen of Troy. She's not there yet, but she takes her back with him to Troy, and she becomes better known as Helen of Troy. But she's already married to Greek King Menelaus. Not surprisingly, her former husband, King Menelaus, is not pleased with this. He's outraged by this, and he demands that Troy turn over his, ex-wife. Oh, in his mind, he never divorced her. And of course, Paris, the culprit. Troy's not going to do that, and that sets in motion this terrible war between the Greeks and the Trojans, better known as the Trojan War. Now, the background to all that, and you don't need all the ins and outs of all that, but it's an example of the gods, for their own reason, tampering with humanity, and not surprisingly, tragic things develop from there. I'm not going to break the whole story down because we just don't have time. You guys probably are familiar with the broad outlines of it. The Greek coalition sets off for Troy. The most famous of those would be Achilles, who's part divine. He's a son of one of the goddesses, in this case Thetis, but you don't need to know that. But he is nearly divine. He's a fantastic warrior. The only part of him that remains human is his heel. You see that painting there on the left of him being dipped in the river of Styx when he was a baby. And all the body that dipped in that river became immortal, with the exception where she's holding it by the heel, that remained human, which will play a role a bit later. The fighting takes place there in Troy. I'm not going to really go into that as the Greeks arrive there. There's lots of ins and outs and drama takes place. It is a masterpiece of drama. I'm just going to mention a couple examples because the Greeks would use this as an example, a teaching example in this famous story, the Iliad and the Odyssey. In this case, the great hero of the Trojans is Hector, and he is a great warrior, respected. Some of the gods of Olympus, they favor the Trojans. Some gods on Mount Olympus favor the Greeks. So as they're watching this human struggle, frequently the gods intervene to aid one side or another, depends whoever their favorite human beings on Earth. So Hector has certain gods and goddesses that like him. On the flip side, Achilles has certain gods and goddesses that like him. Now, to give you a little bit of background to what's coming up here, Achilles is with his nephew, cousin, doesn't matter, cousin nephew, who's with him. And while Achilles is otherwise indisposed, in this case hanging out with some local ladies, his nephew takes Achilles' armor, puts it on, and goes out to fight Hector. Hector fights Achilles' nephew, cousin, I'll have to look it up, thinking it's Achilles. They have an epic battle. Hector eventually wins that battle and kills who he believes is the Greek hero Achilles. Of course, as you and I know, it's not Achilles, it's actually his nephew. Achilles comes from his little tryst with the ladies and finds out what's happened. He is enraged, gets his armor back, and proceeds to go out to fight Hector. They have an epic battle, but Achilles, being nearly divine, as you guys know, eventually wins the battle and kills Hector. Now, so far all of this is sad, but the gods watching on Mount Olympus like, well, two heroes fought, that's how it went down, Achilles won. But after Achilles kills Hector, he's not satisfied. He still is deeply enraged by his embarrassment that he was not on the battlefield earlier and would have protected his nephew. And so he's still enraged, even though he's killed Hector and has since avenged him, but he's not satisfied. And then he makes a tragic mistake in his anger and rage. In this case, he ties Hector's lifeless body to the back of Achilles' chariot, and Achilles races around Troy, dragging Hector's body. Now, the Greeks begged him not to do this. Even though, of course, the Trojans are enemies, but they respect Hector as a great warrior, and so they beat him in combat, we're glad. But don't desecrate his body after death. That's overkill. It's not respectable. Please don't do it. But Achilles has always followed his own path. He's enraged, still angry. He says, I don't care what you guys say, and he does it. And he drags his body around Troy, as you see here. Now, why is that significant? Because, of course, the gods who backed Hector and the Trojans are enraged by this and swear vengeance against Achilles. Now, Achilles is almost immortal, as you guys know, so he's not going to die in battle, with the exception of his heel, which is still immortal. But that's a secret. Almost no one knows that. But the gods and goddesses know that. So you guys probably know the rest of the story. Eventually, they talk to some of the Trojans. They tell them the secret, which is if you hit him in the heel, you can kill him. And one of the goddesses get one of the gods to make special arrows that never miss, designed explicitly to hit Achilles in the heel. Later on the story, surprise, he hit one of his arrows and dies. What's the moral to the story? And what the Greeks would use in this example of Achilles, a great hero, a very brave hero, which the Greeks admire, but he allows, in this case, anger and rage to get the best of him, and he loses a core part of his humanity, at least temporarily, desecrating the body of Hector, which he should never have done. And that sets in motion his own death. Moral of the story, to keep your emotions under control, do not allow any of these unbridled emotions to have reign, because tragedy will ensue. There's a very old depiction there. You can see Achilles in a chariot dragging Hector behind him. Once they capture Troy, as you guys know, eventually they have to work their way home. That is the Odyssey. And for time, we're not going to break that down. You guys, I think back in fourth grade, if you can scroll your memories back that far, you guys talked about this. It is an amazing story. A lot of adventures, you guys know. And again, the Greeks would be using this both because it's fantastic storytelling, but it's also a piece of literature they'd use to educate in general. And what is admirable in the Greek civilization? What is good? What is foolish? What is reckless? A good example of that would be, and you guys probably kind of know the story, there's a famous island on the way back that is full of sirens or harpies. So they appear to be beautiful women who are very lonely. Unfortunately, Odysseus and his crew had been warned that they were going to be there. And so he was warned, be careful of them because their singing and their appearance is so beautiful that the men will be lured to them and be lured to their death. And that's what happened. So fortunately for him, he forewarned by that. He has a whole crew plug their ears so they can't hear. And although he can hear, he has himself tied to a mast. And sure enough, as they row past the scene, they see these beautiful sirens there singing. That's just absolutely seductive, beautiful music. And he desperately wants to leap out of the ship and go and join them. But he cannot because he's tied to the mast, and his men cannot hear them, so they row safely past. The warning for the Greeks is, although they appear to be beautiful women who are fantastic musicians on the harp, they're not women, that they are a monster and a beast, but by appearance, they're luring the men to their death. Now, fortunately for the men, they're able to pass this temptation, but it's a good example of beware of appearances. So to summarize all that, you don't need to know the ins and outs of Hector and Achilles so much, or the sirens there and Odysseus. I'm more concerned of the larger picture of why does this matter and what the Greeks make use of this document for. And that is, in many ways, this is a universal tale of humanity at its best and worst. So that's why it's still a focus of study, both because it's just good storytelling. But additionally, there is, again, a warning in this that sometimes things are not the way they think they are. Beware of arrogance, beware of pride, stay humble, be able to learn, take advice, don't let the emotions get the best of you, beware of appearances. All those kind of lessons are wrapped up in this story. Loyalty as well, bravery, and the opposite of those two. The Greeks also used these to educate their citizens. So if you were any educated Greek of any kind, this would be probably your most important textbook. So instead of having Augustus or the Human Record and whatever other textbooks you have in classes, you would have Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. So it would be both for younger people and for adults as an education for them. As Homer, the author, or perhaps a collection of authors, as he's glorifying heroism, honor, and nobility, in this case in warfare, and showing what is the best Greek society and a warning for what is the dark side as well too. All right, you'll definitely see that on the exam. Let's get to the Greek political identity. Now, Greece is unique here in that Greece is not a nation. Now, we keep saying Greece. Greece simply is a regional cultural grouping of people who are similar, who speak Greek and have some general cultural affinity for each other, but they're not technically a nation. So we say ancient Greece, we're talking a region, not technically a nation, because the Greek nation really is just a city, or in the Greek, the polis. So Greek civilization is a collection of completely independent city-states. So your country or your passport in ancient Greece would not say Greek citizen. It would say Athenian or Spartan, or you're from Corinth or Thebes, etc. A couple things I want you guys to know. You see this all highlighted for you guys. It's a good indication. This little section will be on the exam. Let me make that a little bit bigger for you guys. You can see it a little easier. All right. So in the typical Greek city or polis, all Greeks had the same fundamental rights if you were free, I should say, because the Greeks had many slaves, tragically. In the polis, there was a lot of respect for the law, at least in theory. Citizens of the polis is expected to participate politically. It's really an expectation that everyone participates politically. Something that's also quite unusual is many Greek city-states had elected leaders. Now, that's not true for all of them. Many of them didn't, frankly. But some did. So elected leaders was not unusual in a Greek city-state, which in the ancient world is not common. This is a big one, too. The Greek leaders are not considered divine, which might sound kind of odd if you're familiar with Greek mythology, because a lot of Greek heroes are partially divine or nearly divine. The Greeks would share these stories, but their contemporary Greeks around them in their own city, they did not see them as divine. They saw them as human like the rest of us. Also, they did not have extensive bureaucracy. Again, we talked about city-states, so all citizens are expected to participate, so you kind of take your turns typically. And the Greeks also did not have a standing army typically in the Greek city-states. What that standing army means, an army that's always in existence. Sparta would be an exception to that. But typically, the Greek city-state does not have a standing army, which means when warfare comes, guess what? All the adult males automatically drafted, you're in the military. That is your army, which is the adult males. A lot of Greek culture, as I mentioned before, comes down to us. Look at these Greek terms: monarchy, aristocracy, oligarchy, the rule of few, democracy, tyranny, feudalism, individualism. These are all coming down to us in the Western world from the Greeks. Let's get to Greek warfare because the Greeks took warfare very seriously. And I'd say to a certain degree they are kind of warlike people. I wouldn't say they're addicted to the war like perhaps like the Syrians were, but the Greeks not infrequently are going to war with each other. As an example of some heavily armed heavy infantry, these are hoplites, which I'll explain more in just a minute. So the Greeks honored military skill as a critical aspect of manhood and patriotism. Again, I told you, if you are an adult male, you are due for military service. So that's just that simple. So that's basically from the age probably 18 or 20 or so on into your 40s, as long as you're in decent shape. That when military campaigns required, you don't have to ask yourself, I wonder if I'm in the military. The answer is yes, you are. The hoplite is a primary and most important Greek military unit. He's a very heavily armed, religiously trained heavy infantry. Let me show you some examples of what that would look like. There's an example of hoplite. By the way, hoplites are, the armor that he has is quite expensive. So to be a hoplite, you had to be fairly well-to-do in the Greek city-state where you resided. You're not having a poor man because the state probably cannot afford to arm you. A large state, you kind of arming yourself. So if you're a poor Greek member of the city-state, you're not going to be a hoplite. You might be an archer or a slinger or a skirmisher with some small javelins for throwing, and you maybe have no armor. Hoplites tend to be fairly well citizens because, again, likely they're going to have to, at least to some extent, provide their own armor because it's expensive and you need money for that. But they are, as you see, heavily armored with a large shield, see the breastplate, the graves on the legs, and a helmet. So they're trained to fight as a unit. There's some examples that were hoplites. They fight in a very close packed formation called the phalanx. And that's a good example of it right there. That one is 8 deep. The guys in the front, obviously, are the ones who immediately in combat. When they tire, they'll be replaced by the guy behind them. Or, worst case scenario, maybe they don't finish the battle because they're taken out and the guy behind them replaces them. But you can see the armored front of this would be fearsome. It would look something like this. There's not a lot of parts of them you can injure easily, as you see, because they're covered almost all the way to the upper thigh, and the shield picks up from there, and then they're wearing a helmet above that. So it's not easy to penetrate them because they are so heavily armored. Their spears are quite long, so it's not easy even getting hand-to-hand combat with them. This was a very formidable military formation. It's one of the most successful of the ancient world. Now, it did have some limits and some issues, and the Romans eventually will get something better than this. But at the time, it was one of the most powerful infantry forces in the world. Now, there's some other ones too, but it'll certainly be up there because it's so heavily armored, very difficult to attack, and it's powerful. It also required a great deal of training, as you guys know, and obviously unit cohesion or staying together because you're not fighting as an individual person. If you guys have watched the movie 300, it's getting a little bit older now, but a very enjoyable movie. But there's some big problems with that movie, although I still recommend it. But we'll get to that here in a few minutes. I think that's good for the ancient Greek military. Yeah, you guys are good. Just those two terms I want you guys familiar with: hoplite and phalanx. And they tend to fight in a very disciplined, compact formation called the phalanx, as you see depicted here. All right. Later in Greek history, they would have some very talented engineers develop siege towers similar to this, but that'd be much later. Greek warships would, if possible, ram the enemy. They would also have a bunch of Marines on board to fight hand-to-hand combat. So either way, either by sinking them, by ramming them, or if necessary, you can board them and assault them. All right, let's get to the ladies briefly. Now, I'm working on these notes. I'm working on the Greek ladies. Now, sadly, Greek society, like a lot of ancient societies, tends to be male-dominated, as you guys can probably imagine. We're not saying the Greek women did not play an important role. Of course they did. But the stars of most of Greek culture that remains tends to be the men because it's male-dominated. But women have always played an integral role, and they do in Greece too, so you don't be mistaken. Imagine they're not influential and powerful in their own right. They are. Oftentimes they have to fly kind of below the radar in doing that because they can have no official role typically in the government. I say typically, there are exceptions to this. But here's some depictions of Greek women from that time period. Of Greek women. In the middle, look like they're doing maybe some laundry. On the right, that lady's a courtesan. slash musician slash perhaps prostitute, and she's at a feast. She's entertaining them by playing the flute. There's some more depictions of ancient women. Again, it's a mixed bag because on the one hand, the men tend to be the stars of what's taking place, but it's always a bit more complicated than simply that oversimplification. For example, a lot of the goddesses in the Greek pantheon play a big role in society. For example, Athens, the most famous of all the Greek city-states, the patron deity, protector of Athens, is Athena. And Athena is not some kind of stay-at-home, cuddle up with the Afghan kind of lady. There's nothing wrong with that when I say that, but you know what I'm saying. She's actually a warrior. She's also a patron of the arts. So you see that helmet on her head? That's a part of her warrior aspect. And Athens at times can be quite aggressive, and they view her as a patron saint of their warfare too. That's why she's wearing a helmet. Additionally, I mentioned her dedication to the arts as well too, and other attributes too. The reason I bring that up is you have to have a multi-dimensional understanding of Greek women that, yes, on the one hand, they tend to be in the background in most Greek literature, but that's not always true. We'll see some exceptions to that. But despite that seemingly being relegated to the house, taking care of the children and so forth, it's always more nuanced than what it seems like on that surface image. And that takes us to Sparta. So here, let's pick up with Sparta. Now, Sparta is a unique society. I can't think of any society in the ancient world quite like Sparta. Now, they're Greek, but they're a very unique expression of Greek culture. There's no one else in Greece quite like Sparta, as we'll see here in a minute. For example, when it says city-state society warriors, that is what Sparta is. Now, Sparta, early in its history, and you don't need to know all this detail, that's why it's not written down for you, but Sparta, early in its history, let me show where Sparta is in the Greek homeland. There's Sparta right there. Sparta, early on in its history, decides to take a very unusual path, and they'll explain why they become such a warrior society. So why is that? So Sparta decides, why don't we control the region around us? Now, that's not unique in the ancient world. Empires often get built to do that exact task. The Spartans begin to conquer the small city-states around them, and they do that. And they proceed to enslave many people they conquer. Again, sadly, not unusual. That's kind of the way of the ancient world frequently. The Syrians did that, Babylonians did that, not unusual. But the Spartans double down on this, and although their empire never gets that big, frankly, they decide that for us to maintain these Greek citizens who now are slaves under our control, the only way we do that, obviously, is to maintain control over them, to keep them in that state of enslavement. They refer to them as helots. And they'll do all the work for us, do all the farming, all the agriculture work, all those chores will be done by them. That'll free up the Spartan males to maintain control over them. So in Sparta's little empire, which you guys saw there, Sparta is the head of that, and they maintain their small empire there, which usually was not even as big as what you see there, with here on the left in the purple. But they do that by maintaining control militarily, and they hold all their slaves in submission through military strength. So what that means is, if you're born Spartan male, you have one career path. Unlike you guys, where you're navigating, like, what am I going to do? Most of you guys have a good sense of what you're going to do. But some of you are still kind of thinking, what's my major going to be? What am I going to do later in life? That's not the Spartan male. If you're a Spartan male, you have one career path. One set of goals and vision, which you are a warrior. The whole Spartan state is built to maintain military supremacy over their small little empire there in Greece. And so no Spartan male will, I'm going to become a farmer. They're not going to become a farmer. They become a warrior. We have people farming for us, and they're unfree people. They don't necessarily want to farm for us. But our military prowess and strength holds them as a workforce for us. So every Spartan male, you are going to be a warrior. And that's what we're getting into right here. They referred to the people beneath them as helots. I suppose they're not technically slaves, but that's kind of splitting hairs. In many ways, it's very close to slavery. The Spartans have this powerful army to maintain control of them. Spartans did not ignore education, took education quite seriously, but there's a certain endpoint to Spartan education. So although most Spartans were probably literate, especially quite high among the men and likely among many women, Basically, imagine it this way. Maybe it's a good high school education and then it stops, which is nothing wrong with that. It's fine. But they're not interested in higher level knowledge like you might say in Athens or some other famous Greek city states. The Spartans want you to be literate, and then that's where we're going to stop. They don't want you to get into critical thinking, asking too many questions. Society's already mapped out your chosen path. We need to be educated to fulfill your function within it. But we don't want a lot of free inquiry and questioning what we're doing. That's not what Spartan's about. I mentioned the Spartan Army being exceptionally good. Why is that? Because unlike every other Greek city-state is, the Spartan military trains 24/7, always. Unlike, say, Athens or Thebes or Corinth, these other Greek city-states, who they do train, kind of like a militia, think of almost like a National Guard. Maybe 1 weekend a month you train, you practice, you get good. Spartans don't practice 1 weekend a month. They practice every day because it's their whole livelihood. So every Spartan young male at a young age goes in the Spartan Military Academy, typically at the age of 7. So at the age of 7, they go to boot camp, which gives you an idea of how harsh and rigorous Sparta was. At the age of 7, can you imagine age of 7? If you have kids, or imagine you age 7, you're taken into military academy. When I say academy, it's a hardcore boot camp. It's not a kind or gentle. They don't ease you into it. So when you go in at 7, you go into a very harsh, think Marine boot camp. That's what these poor boys go into. It's very dog eat dog in there, by the way. In fact, the older boys are encouraged, to some extent, even abuse younger boys to toughen them up. It's a rough existence. But they're doing calisthenics, exercises, run, learning combat, wrestling, boxing, all those things you see depicted right here, being pushed on, egged, teased, humiliated, sometimes physically assaulted by the older boys who are already well trained, to weed out the weak and make them as tough as possible. By the time a Spartan man is 20, he's officially enrolled in the army, and he'll go into combat if Sparta requires him to do that. By that time, he's in exceptionally good shape. He's been training, as you see, for all those years. He's been training for 13 years nonstop. He is a tremendously fearsome warrior, probably man for man, probably the best in the ancient world because of absolute complete commitment. Sparta is not a massive city, so there's never that many Spartan warriors. It sounds kind of odd, but the Spartan army is actually never that big because it is just one city-state there. But there were warriors based on their skill. Their reputation far exceeds their numbers. There you go. So, by the way, again, you don't need all the details of that. That's why it's not highlighted for you guys. You can focus on right here, which is these professional, hardened, courageous, patriotic, selfless Spartan soldiers. That's what they're bred to be. They don't lose. They don't surrender. They win. And if they don't win, you probably need to die in the process. Simply put, the best in the ancient Greece, justly feared and respected by all the Greeks. Spartan women. By the way, I need to tell you one story here before we leave the Spartan men. So there's a morality tale told by the Spartans about a Spartan young man. The Spartan young man is in the military academy. He's going through this very ferocious boot camp. He's hungry. Now, the reason why he's hungry is typically Spartans. You have an idea what this boot camp's like, besides all the rough and tumble and hazing. You guys know what hazing, right? Boy, Spartan military, the ultimate hazing. So this young boy is not fed enough, which is quite common. Typically, the academy teachers in the Spartan boot camp not feed their young men enough. Now, why would you do that? They're exercising all day long. They're hungry. They're growing. They're exerting a tremendous amount of calories as they train. And they would feed them some, although the food would be pretty god-awful, frankly, and simple and not enough. They intentionally want the boys to be hungry, to make them leaner, used to living in a difficult situation, and also to be so hungry that the boys are tempted to go out at night and get some extra food by stealing it from the local helot or slave population. Now, these boys are also reminded they cannot be caught doing that. If they're caught stealing, they'll face tremendous shame. Tremendous shame, and some physical consequences too. So you cannot be caught. But they encourage the boys to go out and steal, and the point of that is to be smart, to be swift, and steal at night successfully, not get caught, get back to the barracks with a little bit of extra food to eat. So, this young Spartan warrior, hungry, stomach rumbling, heads out at night to a local helot farm to try to find something to eat. So in the darkness, he stumbles into a chicken coop, in the mad scramble to grab something to eat. The chickens are all flying around trying to loot him. And what do you know? He grabs a marten or marten, a little which had stuck its way in the chicken coop to kill them. A marten or a weasel. Anyways, some small killer had snuck into the chicken coop, and the boy and this young warrior, in his frantic search in the dark to grab something to eat, he grabbed every furry thing he could, and he missed the chicken and grabbed this thing. So he grabs this marten, this little weasel, and sticks him on his stomach, puts him in his coat, prepares to dash out. Right when he does that, though, the Helot arrives and grabs him and says, "What have you done? I know you've taken something." Now it's dark, he can't see very well, and the young Spartan warrior, before he was grabbed, was able to shove the still alive and squiggling marten into his tunic. So it's not visible. Again, it's dark. But this creature, this little predator that's next to his stomach, is going crazy trying to escape. Now, the boy can't do much about them because with one hand he's holding them beneath his coat, the other hand he's gesturing to defend himself, saying, "I didn't steal anything," as this guy is confronting him. Now, conversation goes on for a little while. The young Spartan warrior continues to say, "I didn't steal anything. You got me wrong. I just happened to be walking by. You heard a commotion. You're blaming me, but I didn't steal anything at all." The guy's like, "I know you stole something. What did you take?" And he continues to deny it. Meanwhile, that marten, that little creature there, is going nuts, and with its teeth and its claws is tearing his stomach. Now, even though he's bleeding and it's incredibly painful, he does not open his cloak and throw out this little predator that he grabbed accidentally, because obviously he'd be caught in shame, and he cannot do that. So eventually the local Helot is, "I guess, okay, maybe you didn't steal anything," and lets him go. The young warrior then begins to proceed back to his barracks, where he can wring the neck of that little predator and maybe eat him. I know that's not what he's looking for, but that's something. But he has lost so much blood. That little marten has done so much damage to him that when he gets back to the barracks, he keels over from blood loss and dies. That is a terrible story. Don't tell your kids that as a bedtime story. It's a horrible story. But for the Spartans, it's a morality sale. So why is it? Well, the young warrior should not have been caught. That was his mistake. But, and there's a big but he was honorable even though he was experiencing tremendous pain and blood loss. He never lost his honor, that he held that marten to his chest the whole time, even though it was freaking out and clawing and biting him. But he did not want to be shamed. And despite the pain and agony of that, he did not allow himself to be shamed. He was able to escape the accusation and return to the barracks, where he died. So, yes, he made a mistake, not been caught in the first place, but he is a true Spartan warrior who we can honor because despite the pain and even ultimately his death, he did not disgrace himself. Spartan women are also expected to be in tip-top shape. Actually, Spartan women are quite independent in many ways. Spartan men were not allowed to marry and live with their wives till they were 45. So you could get married earlier than that, but you would actually not live with your wife. So the men are oftentimes gone trained. The women are often by themselves. And the women, frankly, ran Spartan society when it came to most tasks. For example, manage the household, manage the slaves who are working on your estate, who are doing the agriculture, the farming. All that is managed by the woman of the house. Women are also expected to be in tip-top shape themselves too, so not just the men. Now, it's not quite as intense to the women, but it's actually very similar. To Spartan women expect to be in outstanding physical condition. And why is that? So they can give birth to very healthy boys and model physical condition to these boys as well too. For example, these are two sculptures of Spartan women. The girl on the left is preparing to run, and the other girl on the right is also another female athlete. Now, as you guys probably guessed, despite having an outstanding military, there's a dark side to the Spartan way of life. There is really no freedom of choice. If you're a young lady or a young man, you're like, "I want to be a poet, Mom." No. "I want to be a sculptor." No. "I want to be a merchant, travel the world." No. Any other role in life besides what's assigned to you by your gender, which is a mom, leader of the household for the women, or in the men's case, a warrior, that is your only option. Additionally, Spartan society relied extensively on slavery. All the Greek city-states had slaves, tragically, but the Spartans took that to a whole new level. Their empire really is built on extensive slavery. So not they just have some slaves. Their empire is built upon slavery because the average person within the Spartan empire is not free. That'd be the Helots. As you guys also saw, it's survival of the fittest. If a Spartan baby is born male, female, and it's not healthy, that baby will be left to die or thrown from a cliff, and because they're not going to raise anyone that's not tip-top shape, male or female. So it is a very dog-eat-dog environment. So if the baby has a handicap, some kind of issue, they're not even going to try to raise it. They're simply, that baby's going to die. Intellectually and economically, Sparta was also very isolated too. Spartans were forbidden to travel outside Sparta unless on a special mission for Sparta. So there were authorized missions where you could go, but typically forbidden to travel outside Sparta. And why is that? They probably didn't want you to see there's other options in life. And there's other ways to live. You don't all have to be the most hardcore warriors trained 24/7. Or in the lady's case, live alone while your husband's gone for year upon year and we're running simply slaves. There are other modes of life. And the Spartan society is not open to these other possibilities to raise too many questions. And sadly, the Spartans did not write down their own history. So most of what we get about Spartans comes from other Greeks, frankly, a lot from Athenians, which are very different than Sparta. But we don't have a lot of insider information of how the Spartans themselves looked at each other, which is ironic because most Spartans probably were literate, but we just don't have any of their histories. And the last one there, that's not so important, but they were also known for a lack of humor. Maybe it's not so important, but it's sad. I don't know what you do with that humor. It's one of the wonderful gifts we have, is to be able to laugh as a coping method and also for enjoyment too. And the Spartans, I'm not saying some Spartans have a sense of humor, but just not part of their culture. Just not. They tend to have a quite serious culture. Humor, jesting, just not typically a part of it. Significance of Sparta. So this is something you'll see on the exam as well too. Skill, bravery, endurance, patriotism, civic selflessness, discipline of Spartan Army both helped the Greeks maintain their cultural survival, which we're getting to a little bit with the wars with the Persians, but also remained a lasting example of military excellence, deep patriotism, and sacrifice. Down to this day, the Spartans remain famous because they were such exceptionally well-trained warriors with absolute commitment to victory and to the nation, and to die in the process if they cannot achieve that. I don't know how many football teams out there named Spartans in the United States or basketball teams, but there are a ton of them. And their impact in the Western world continues to be profound as the ultimate example of absolute self-discipline, self-denial, patriotism. Now, as you guys know, there's a dark side, as you guys know. It's a very rigid, regimented society. There's really no freedom for the individual there. So you are part of the machine of Sparta, and that's what you're going to have to just accept. That is reality. So if you don't want to live in that, you're going to have to leave, frankly. So if you're like, I would like to be a poet, okay, then you're going to have to sneak away from the academy, do not get caught, and don't come back. You have to permanently leave Sparta, immigrate to the Greek city-state, change your name, and assume a new identity because you're no longer Spartan. You're considered a traitor for doing that. We'll come back to Sparta because they're going to play a big role here in the next lecture with the wars against the Persians and even the Peloponnesian War. But that's for the next lecture where we pick up with Athens, one of the great city-states and its profound influence on the West. But that is for our next lecture, so we'll see you in that next lecture. All right, everybody.